Nike is one of the world's largest sportswear companies, worth about $116 billion. However, as one of today's most sought-after shoe brands, it's easy to overlook its humble beginnings. It all started with a poor college graduate who dreamed of bringing high-quality and affordable running shoes to America. Despite his classmates' disapproval when he presented the idea, he proved everyone wrong, turning his vision into a reality and creating one of the most iconic companies in the world. Today, we're taking a journey back to Nike's earliest days to uncover how this successful brand was built and the man behind it all. The year is 1962, and Phil Knight has just graduated with a master's degree from Stanford Business School. Like any other college graduate, he has high expectations for his life. But instead, Phil finds himself back at home, living with his parents. While living with them, 24-year-old Phil felt as if life was just passing him by, and he needed to do something meaningful. One evening, Phil works up the courage and tells his father about his crazy business idea and his plan to travel the world with one of his friends. The idea itself was something Phil came up with as a research project for one of his classes at Stanford. In that paper, he wrote, "Can Japanese sports shoes do to German sports shoes what Japanese cameras did to German cameras?" Phil had seen how Japanese cameras had replaced the popular German cameras, and he wondered whether Japanese shoes could do the same to German shoes, which were extremely popular at the time. His idea was to import high-quality, low-cost running shoes from Japan into the American market. Just like his fellow classmates at Stanford, his father was not impressed with the idea. However, he approved Phil's plan to travel around the world, calling it a finishing touch to his education. His father gave him his blessing and the money he needed for the trip. On September 7, 1962, Phil and his friend began their journey to travel around the world. Obsessed with the idea of bringing Japanese shoes to the American market, one of their destinations was Japan. Phil wanted to see if he could turn his ambitious idea into reality. However, before traveling to Japan, they first visited several countries, exploring various cities in Europe and Asia, while trying their best to see important landmarks and learn about the local cultures. Phil and his friend then went to Hawaii, and that's where their paths would diverge. While in Hawaii, they surfed and relaxed on the beach, falling in love with the place so much that they decided to get jobs and stay for a while before continuing their travels. They found work as door-to-door encyclopedia salesman. Phil was pretty shy, and he performed terribly in his sales job. Eventually, Phil ultimately decided it was time to leave. When he told his friend it was time to move on, his friend didn't want to leave. He had met a woman in Hawaii and wanted to stay with her instead. Phil was devastated, but he had no choice but to continue the rest of their journey alone. So, in November 1962, Phil said goodbye to his friend and took a flight headed to Japan. While exploring the beautiful city of Kobe, he came across a shoe brand that caught his eye. The brand was called Tiger, and it was manufactured by a company named Onitsuka. The shoe was not only well-designed, but also affordable and of high quality. Phil liked it so much that he called the brand's owners, introducing himself as an American shoe distributor, and managed to arrange a meeting with them. Phil was both nervous and excited. But before going to the meeting, he bought a book titled How to Do Business with the Japanese and absorbed as much information as he could. Phil presented his idea to the managers and offered to become Onitsuka's distributor in the United States. To his surprise, the managers were impressed by his proposal. It turned out that Onitsuka had been looking for a way to sell their shoes in the US market. However, one of them asked a very simple question. "What is the name of your company?" Phil's mind raced, and he felt as though his world was falling apart. The truth was that Phil didn't have a company yet. He just had an idea to import Japanese shoes to the US. After a short pause, Phil replied, "I represent Blue Ribbon Sports from Portland, Oregon." He had just made the name up on the spot. With nothing more than his confidence, Phil had become the exclusive distributor of Onitsuka shoes in the United States. He then requested them to ship a few sample shoes worth $50 to his address in America. Phil was thrilled. His dream was on the verge of becoming a reality. He, however, continued exploring new places and in February 1963, he returned home. His parents were overjoyed to have their son back safely, and after sharing stories of his travels, his first order of business was to ask if the shoes had arrived. To his surprise, no shoes had been sent. Months passed, and Phil couldn't stop wondering what had happened to the shipment. With no shoes on site, Phil wrote to Onitsuka, asking about the samples he'd been promised. They quickly replied, assuring him that the shoes would arrive soon. Phil couldn't help but doubt them, suspecting he might have been ripped off. Phil was back living with his parents again, and that feeling that life was just passing him by was back. Depressed, he decided to get a job in order to make some money, and he ended up working as an accountant, a job he didn't like. Suddenly, one morning in January 1964, Phil received his shipment from Japan, and when he opened the box, he saw a dozen beautiful pairs of Tiger running shoes. Phil was so excited and was now ready to kickstart his shoe business. Hoping to gain both a sale and an influential endorsement, Phil mailed 2 pairs to his former coach, Bowerman, at the University of Oregon. You see, Bowerman was one of the most famous coaches in America at the time. He had trained multiple Olympic athletes, so an endorsement from him would mean a lot to Phil, who knew Bowerman's expertise in running shoes was unmatched. Phil also began selling the shoes out of the trunk of his car at any running track he could drive to. Bowerman eventually got back to Phil, not only expressing his approval of the Tiger shoes, but also offering to become his business partner. Thus, in January 1964, the 2 men incorporated Blue Ribbon Sports Company, each investing $500 into it. All that money was used to order 300 pairs of Tiger shoes at $3.33 each. Phil also wrote to Onitsuka, asking them if Blue Ribbon Sports could be the exclusive distributor of Tiger shoes in the Western United States, and they agreed. The shipment came through in April 1964, and thanks to Bowerman's connections and Phil's dedication, the shoes were sold out by July. Phil was so thrilled that he decided to quit his day job and dedicate himself full-time to his new company. By the end of that year, they had sold $8,000 worth of shoes, and with those earnings, Phil ordered more shoes from Japan. They also recruited salespeople for their company, most of whom were former athletes who shared the vision of bringing better running shoes to the United States. Their first employee was Jeff Johnson, who would later come up with the iconic company name, Nike. As their sales rose rapidly, they were able to open their first retail store in 1966 to sell their shoes. Phil and his new employee, Johnson, handled the business side of operations, while Bowerman focused on the creative side of things. Bowerman was all about innovation. With each new shipment from Onitsuka, he'd cut open the shoes to understand how they were made and find ways to improve them. He also shared his insights with Onitsuka to better improve their shoes to suit runners' needs. At this point, Bowerman was effectively designing Onitsuka's shoes for them. It was one of Bowerman's designs that became one of the brand's most iconic shoes. The Cortez, as he called it, was a big hit, and it drove Blue Ribbon Sports sales to $84,000 by the end of 1968, becoming the best-selling shoe. Business was doing great, and everything seemed to be working well for both parties. However, what Phil didn't know was that Onitsuka was planning to stab them in the back. Hey guys, before we continue, I just want to say, if you find this story interesting, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. The Cortez shoe was so successful that they couldn't keep up with demand. Every shipment sold out faster than the previous one, yet Onitsuka continued to send the shoes at the same slow pace. It was only later that Phil discovered that Onitsuka had been selling to their Japanese customers first as their priority, and then sending whatever was left to the US. They were also slow to implement Bowerman's design suggestions, sometimes even ignoring them. Hoping to salvage the situation and negotiate a contract extension, Phil arranged a meeting with an Onitsuka representative named Kitami. However, the meeting was unusual. Kitami expressed dissatisfaction with Blue Ribbon's numbers, despite their sales doubling each year. Phil, already suspicious that Onitsuka might be considering partnerships with other distributors, saw an opportunity when Kitami briefly left the meeting to use the restroom. Phil took a look inside a folder Kitami had brought and discovered that Onitsuka was planning to leave Blue Ribbon Sports for a different distributor. Phil was outraged and hurt. He felt betrayed by Onitsuka. After all, Onitsuka's success in the US was all thanks to Blue Ribbon Sports. It was now clear to Phil that Blue Ribbon Sports' partnership with Onitsuka would not last much longer, and they needed to prepare an exit plan. It took Phil some time to move past Onitsuka's betrayal, but once he did, he realized that for the company to expand, they needed to evolve beyond being just a simple distributor. After all, Onitsuka's best-selling shoe, the Cortez, was Bowerman's design, so why shouldn't they make and sell their own shoes? In 1971, the two co-founders began working on the branding of their new company. Phil's first employee, Johnson, suggested the name Nike, after the Greek goddess of victory. Next, they needed a logo, so they recruited a graphic design student from a nearby university who for just $35 created the now iconic swooshes logo. With their branding complete, they were now ready to challenge Onitsuka and strive to dominate the US shoe market. This time, Phil made sure not to repeat the mistake he made with Onitsuka. Instead of committing to a single manufacturer, he established a network of subcontractors in Japan, giving him greater control over production. In 1971, the company Blue Ribbon Sports officially became Nike. From then onwards, Nike's expansion skyrocketed as it grew into the renowned sports brand we recognize today. Thanks to brilliant marketing strategies like the Just Do It campaign, Nike pioneered the practice of signing high-profile athletes to promote its brand. Phil Knight released his autobiography in 2016, where he delves into far more detail than I could cover in this video. If you've enjoyed the story so far, you can order the book using the link in the description. As always, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like the video.